She testified about being raped in 2020. Then she testified again in 2025. Then she took the stand a third time in 2026. After 3 grueling trials, there is still no final verdict. In that most recent 2026 proceeding, the jury deadlocked entirely. Reports indicate that 9 out of the 12 jurors actually wanted to acquit. Now, prosecutors are debating whether to put the system through a 4th trial. The woman at the center of this legal limbo is Jessica Mann. The man she is accusing is former Hollywood titan Harvey Weinstein. To be clear, the defendant is not free. He is currently serving a 16-year sentence in a California state prison for completely separate convictions. That sentence stands regardless of what happens in New York. In the court of public opinion, this case closed years ago. But in the legal record, the reality is an unresolved, compounding cycle of mistrials. Go back to that first trial in 2020. The jury convicted the defendant, resulting in a 23-year sentence. For dozens of women who had described decades of allegations, and for the global movement tracking the case, this felt like definitive accountability. Then, in April 2024, the New York Court of Appeals handed down a 4-3 decision. They overturned the conviction. The appellate court found egregious procedural errors. The trial judge allowed testimony from women whose allegations were not part of the charges. The court ruled this prejudiced the jury against the defendant. Because of that ruling, the conviction was vacated entirely. The state was forced to start over from scratch. The legal system is built on rigid procedural rules, not public sentiment. A single technical error in the courtroom can erase the culmination of a massive social movement. That brings us to the 2025 retrial. To secure a criminal conviction, the law demands perfect agreement. All 12 jurors must be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. This flowchart illustrates the split outcome. The jury reached a guilty verdict regarding a different accuser, Miriam Haley, but on the specific rape charge involving Jessica Mann, they deadlocked. This meant Jessica Mann had to sit in a courtroom, face aggressive cross-examination, and recount the worst experience of her life to a room full of strangers for a second time, without getting an answer. When a trial repeats, the mechanics heavily favor the defense. Attorneys can comb through the transcripts of previous testimonies, hunting for the smallest memory inconsistencies across the years to argue the encounter was consensual. As the years pass and testimonies multiply, human memory naturally shifts, yet the court demands absolute precision, placing a heavier burden on the accuser each subsequent trial. By the time the 3rd trial began in 2026, the strain on the process was visible. During deliberations, the jury foreperson approached the judge. A juror reported being verbally threatened, yelled at, and told by another juror they would be met outside for their voting position. He refused to return to the deliberation room. The defense immediately asked for a mistrial, based on juror intimidation. The judge rejected the motion and pressured the threatened juror right back into the room to keep deliberating. This diagram shows the inevitable collapse that followed. The jury deadlocked, and reports revealed that 9 out of 12 jurors actually wanted to acquit on the rape charge. While the cameras covered the courthouse steps, the actual machinery of the trial broke down entirely behind closed doors, paralyzed by internal hostility and systemic dysfunction. Now, prosecutors face an incredibly difficult calculation. They have repeatedly stated their public commitment to survivors, but they are staring at the stark mathematical reality of a recent jury, where a supermajority was not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. They also have to weigh the physical reality of the defendant. He is 74 years old, with severe vision problems and in rapidly failing health. Even without a new conviction, his current California sentence will keep him in prison until he is 90. Then there is the human variable. Moving forward means asking a 40-year-old woman to sit on the witness stand and endure a brutal cross-examination about her rape for a 4th time. Taking this case to a 4th trial is the highest-risk gamble the prosecution could make. There is no obvious, clean path forward. In October 2017, the exposure of these allegations resulted in swift social consequences. The defendant was fired in days, and public conversation shifted globally in weeks. But that immediate accountability gave way to a grinding 6-year legal quagmire. Prosecuting private crimes is inherently difficult. Physical evidence is scarce. Cross-examinations are brutal by design. And maintaining the strict standard of beyond or reasonable doubt across multiple, entirely different juries is incredibly hard. Look at the sheer volume of the New York legal record. 1 conviction that was thrown out, 1 retrial that produced a partial conviction, and 2 agonizing deadlocks on the final charge. This case launched a global movement and was supposed to be the definitive proof that the justice system could hold powerful predators accountable. Instead, it has produced the most legally complicated outcome of any prosecution it inspired. Whether prosecutors push for a 4th trial or the remaining charges are dropped entirely, the historical record is already set. It reveals a strict, mechanical legal system that is unequipped to deliver clean, cinematic endings.
Welcome to This Explainer. If you've been following the news over the last several years, you already know the cultural impact of the Harvey Weinstein story. I mean, it was completely earth-shattering. But the legal record? Well, that is an entirely different, incredibly messy reality. Today, we're going to untangle this chaotic web, looking strictly at the facts, the timelines, and the extraordinary courtroom maneuvers to understand exactly where this landmark case stands right now.
Let's kick things off with one staggering number, 3. It's a single digit, right? But it holds an immense, crushing amount of weight when you realize what it actually means for the human beings caught inside the grinding machinery of our justice system. 3 trials, 3 testimonies, 3 deadlocks. Specifically, a 40-year-old woman named Jessica Mann has taken the stand and testified under oath about being raped 3 separate times over the course of 6 years. And yet, the legal system still hasn't delivered a final answer on those charges. So how on earth did we arrive at this unprecedented legal stalemate? We've got to go back to the beginning.
Section 1. The Hollywood Open Secret.
Let's look at how Harvey Weinstein went from an absolute Hollywood titan to the global symbol of an accountability movement. Born in Queens, New York, he co-founded Miramax Films back in 1979 with his brother Bob. He built it into this massive Oscar-making powerhouse, overseeing absolute classics like Pulp Fiction, Good Will Hunting, and Shakespeare in Love. He was literally one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, a guy whose simple approval or disapproval could make or end an entire career. But for decades, his power was matched by his alleged predation. Women in the industry described being assaulted, harassed, and coerced. Settlements were paid out. NDAs were signed. It was basically an open secret. Then, boom, October 2017. The New York Times and The New Yorker published these explosive, incredibly detailed investigations. The shift was absolute whiplash. Within days, he was fired from his own company. Within weeks, the MeToo movement had completely transformed how the whole world talked about sexual power dynamics.
Section 2. 6 years of legal chaos. Now, while the cultural verdict felt pretty much instantaneous, the legal reality, that's been a grinding 6-year marathon. It is absolutely crucial to separate what's happening in New York from what's happening in California. In New York, the reality is a total maze. We're talking an overturned conviction, consecutive mistrials, and unresolved rape charges. But the California reality is totally different. In Los Angeles back in 2022, he was convicted of rape and sexual assault against a European actor and handed a 16-year sentence. That California conviction is entirely separate, it has not been overturned, and he is currently serving that time in a state prison right now, regardless of whatever happens on the East Coast.
So, let's untangle this New York timeline, because, honestly, most people only know fragments of it. In 2020, Weinstein was convicted of third-degree rape against Jessica Mann and a criminal sexual act against Miriam Haley. He got 23 years. That was the verdict that defined his public image and felt like a massive, landmark victory for MeToo. Then, as we know, came the separate 2022 California conviction. But then, fast forward to 2024, and that original New York conviction was shockingly overturned. A retrial was ordered. The first New York retrial happened in 2025. It yielded a mixed verdict, a conviction on one count and acquittal on another, but a complete deadlock on the rape charge against Jessica Mann, which directly led to the second New York retrial, the third overall trial, in May 2026. And on May 15, 2026, that jury deadlocked entirely.
Let's zoom in on that 2024 overturn for a second, because it is literally the pivot point of this whole saga. In April 2024, the New York Court of Appeals vacated that original 2020 conviction in a razor-thin 4-3 decision. Why? Well, the court found egregious errors in how the trial was conducted. Specifically, the trial judge allowed testimony from witnesses whose allegations weren't actually part of the criminal charges. The appeals court ruled that this prejudiced the jury. So, they erased the landmark conviction and forced the justice system to essentially start over from scratch.
Section 3. 3 testimonies, no answer. Starting over means real human beings have to take the stand all over again. Jessica Mann met Weinstein at a Los Angeles party in early 2013, hoping to build an acting career. She alleges he raped her. Just think about this timeline. She testified in the 2020 trial, then again in the 2025 retrial, and then again in the 2026 retrial. Across 3 trials spanning 6 years, she has had to sit just feet away from the man she alleges assaulted her. And every single time, she's faced intense defense attorneys whose strategy included challenging the nature of their relationship and suggesting the encounters were totally consensual.
Following that crazy 2026 mistrial, her legal representative released a statement saying, over the course of many weeks during 3 separate trials, she relived unthinkably painful experiences in front of complete strangers. And, this really hits the nail on the head regarding the severe human toll of our justice system. Plus, that statement deliberately left out whether she'd be willing to testify in a 4th trial if prosecutors decide to go for it. The huge question of what justice even looks like for her, still completely unanswered.
Section 4. Threats inside the jury room.
To understand why that 2026 retrial failed so spectacularly, we have to look at what happened completely behind closed doors during deliberations. It was deeply disturbing. Step 1, the jury foreperson approached Judge Curtis Farber to report a private matter. Step 2, the judge explained that a juror said he couldn't go back into the room because another juror had made comments to the effect of saying they would meet him outside one day. Step 3, we're talking actual yelling and screaming erupting in the deliberation room. A juror was literally being threatened for his position. Step 4, defense attorneys immediately filed a motion for a mistrial based on this intimidation. The judge actually denied it and forced them to keep going. But finally, Step 5, that fractured, volatile jury predictably deadlocked anyway, forcing a high-profile mistrial.
And looking at how those votes broke down is incredibly revealing. 9 of the 12 jurors reportedly wanted to acquit Weinstein, while only 3 wanted to convict or were undecided. That is a 9-3 supermajority leaning toward acquittal. If prosecutors are trying to figure out whether to retry this case for a 4th time, this specific detail is the absolute biggest hurdle they have to confront today.
Because of that supermajority, both sides are looking at 2 totally different realities right now. On one side, prosecutors are weighing some massive risks. They have to ask themselves, do we really subject the accuser to another grueling cross-examination against a 74-year-old man who's already locked up in California? On the flip side, the defense's reality is highly optimistic. Defense attorney Mark Agnifilo publicly stated he is pleased, claiming the mistrial as a win, and saying they have outstanding prospects for a total acquittal if prosecutors dare to try again.
Section 5. The reality of MeToo.
Which brings us to the stark contrast between cultural expectations and the rigid realities of the law. When evaluating what happens next, we have to look at Harvey Weinstein today. He's 74 years old. He is serving that 16-year sentence in a California state prison. In recent court appearances, he's appeared incredibly frail, he's using a wheelchair, and his health is noticeably deteriorating. He's even experiencing severe vision issues that required surgery. The practical reality? He'll be 90 years old if he serves his California sentence in full. This physical reality really complicates the necessity, the optics, and honestly, the public interest of funding and enduring any more New York trials.
Ultimately, we are left confronting a really difficult truth. The legal system was just never designed to deliver the clear, definitive accountability that the MeToo movement demanded. I mean, the court of public opinion moves fast, right? But the court of law? It requires navigating private predation, inherently limited evidence, brutal cross-examinations by design, and that incredibly high bar of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. As we've seen with the overturned conviction and the deadlocked juries, these mechanisms rarely produce clean, neat conclusions.
As prosecutors weigh whether to initiate a 4th trial, we are left looking at a severely fragmented legal record. The very case that was supposed to prove that accountability works has produced the most legally complicated outcome of any major prosecution it inspired. So we really have to ask ourselves, after 3 trials, 6 years, unimaginable legal chaos, and still no final verdict on these charges, is this the justice we actually expected? Thanks so much for joining me as we unpack this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.